Hello and welcome to Carlos and Lisa. I'm Lisa Remillard.
And I'm Carlos Amesquith. So nice to have you with us. All right, well, let's talk about the use of deadly force by law enforcement. It has sparked protests, debates, and a lot of controversy in recent years after the deaths of Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, and Eric Garner.
Here in California, we obviously are not immune to all of this. Last year alone, according to California's own Justice Department, 146 people died at the hands of police.
Stephon Clark was one. He was in Sacramento when officers responded to a call of vandalism and mistook his cell phone for a weapon. They shot and killed Clark in the alley behind his grandmother's backyard.
Prosecutors declined to file charges against the officers involved, and it was his case that became the tipping point and led to brand new legislation that Governor Newsom just signed into law. And it is one of the nation's strictest laws when it comes to regulating the use of force, deadly force, by police.
Yeah, this new law directs police to use deadly force only when it's quote unquote necessary. The current law says deadly force can only be used when it's reasonable.
So that is the issue, there's a lot of things that this law does.
The words reasonable and necessary.
But that's what everybody keeps talking about, is those words. And should we really get our law enforcement into semantics when it comes to that split-second decision that they have to make? And on the other hand, you have all of these, oftentimes, young African-American men who are dying in this scenario. So Governor Newsom hopes to see similar laws, just like this, spread across to other states in this country.
As California goes, so goes the rest of the United States of America, and we are doing something today that stretches the boundaries of possibility. It sends a message to people all across this country that they can do more and they can do better to meet this moment in their respective states.
All right, so this new law is going to affect protocols and training for law enforcement all over the state of California. Police supporters are concerned, however, that the lack of clarity on the word necessary puts officers at risk by causing them to second guess, as you said, their actions while this is all going on. So we talked to criminologist and law enforcement trainer Dr. Alex Del Carmen about this issue.
So there are two issues at hand, right? One of them is that you may get the type of officer that does not understand the new law, does not understand the new policy, and actually may be hesitant to use force, which we obviously don't want that, right? So if police officers are facing a situation where they have to use deadly force, you know, the law and the Constitution, and more importantly, their policy actually protects them and encourages them to use the necessary force, the reasonable force, in order to neutralize a threat. On the other hand, you may have other officers that are equally confused, but maybe, as we would say, quick to the trigger, right? They may actually look at an instance and react to it and not necessarily know what the word necessary is and translate it in that split of a second decision that they have to make, right? I often call law enforcement, the profession as a whole, 100 hours of boredom, 1 second of terror, because oftentimes that second of terror comes unannounced and officers have to rely almost as muscle reflex on instinct and based on what the training that they received over the years would actually dictate for them to operate in that particular scenario.
Oh, lots of things to unpack there, yeah.
Well, you know, you talk about non-lethal forms of submission that the police use to sometimes get subjects and suspects under control.
Holds, the stick, the taser, all those things, yeah.
Right, and then of course there's a whole bunch of Pandora's boxes that opens once you start going down those routes. Right. But it's going to, as Dr. Del Carmen was talking about, it's going to come down to the training aspect. He also suggested, when we talked to him in the interview, that perhaps the Attorney General of the state of California, now that this law has been signed by the governor, the Attorney General really needs to step in and really needs to give some very clear direction to police agencies, law enforcement agencies all over the state, clear directions on how to train the officers with this. I mean, we saw this when they implemented the use of body cameras,
right,
and how long it took them to just get the muscle memory to start those things.
Create a policy, right? So, it's interesting because you know, victims advocates say changing one word like necessary, probable to necessary, when using deadly force can be used, should be cause for concern for everyone, as Dr. Del Carmen said. Listen to what Mark Halsalter had to say about that.
But the problem is this may be a paper tiger, where until the courts figure out what that definition exactly means, we're not going to know how it affects everyone's daily lives and what happens in actual cases with juries and with judges. So I think time will tell on how this actually plays out. But right now, to think it's going to have some drastic effect on our legal system is just not going to happen.
So Mark is a criminal defense attorney. He's also a former prosecutor who has gone through several cases in the past with victims of this type of deadly force. He has represented the families on the other end. And what he said is that, as you heard, this can't be the magic solution to everything, and there has to be so many other things that happen. And even victims' families that were there with the governor said at that press conference, like, we know that this isn't going to solve all the problems.
Yeah, he's also been on the other side as a prosecutor, so he sees both sides of this thing. And I don't think there's an easy answer. And what you said about the Attorney General is always interesting, because it seems to me that that should have been something that was done before the law was passed, or before he signed it, that he should have given some, but they really want to do something about that. There's been Shirley Weber's been pushing this in San Diego.
Yeah, for years.
And for a long, long time. And so Governor Newsom said it was time to do this. And so all these things that have happened have kind of escalated, and he wanted to put a stop to it. And I see what he's doing. But yeah, police departments are now having to figure out what does necessary mean.
Again, it's one of these things that, you know, obviously something has to be done, period, because, you know, unarmed people, regular, normal citizens should be able to go about their daily business and not encounter police in this deadly situation. But on the other side, there is the rest of the population that needs to be protected as well by police officers, and that's their job, is to protect the public. So there is a fine line. Lawmakers are trying to walk it, and in California, they are walking it a very tight rope right now. The strictest new law, it will go into effect as of January 1st, so law enforcement agencies have between now and then to come up with what is necessary and train on what is necessary, because it's coming.
Dr. Del Carmen, how many he trained? How many thousands?
Tens of thousands
of police officers. And he said, you know, and he mentioned that when we were talking about him, that the officer has to make a decision: is it reasonable or is it necessary? In a split second, that 1 second of terror for that police officer, and that's what we're dealing with here. And based on what's happened recently, they're now having to think about it. And so is that going to go into the retraining in the academies when these officers go in? And then what about the officers who've been there for 30 years?
Yeah.
And their interpretation of necessary is way different than, say, a rookie. So see all the variables?
It opens all kinds of different variables, but this is a really complicated issue. California taking this step, a huge step in a direction that no other state in the country has. So we're going to be hearing a lot about this. I'm sure this is not the last time we'll be talking about that. But again, this new law goes into effect on January 1st. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.